contest. Let's get more on that now from Sky's Emma Birchley. Emma, who is at the High Court this morning. Emma.
It's that result coming in the last half an hour in Court 3 here at the High Court, where the High Court judges ruled in favour.
Is the earth flat? The question has only come before the courts once. Two men are in court. This is the case of Hampden versus Walsh. On one side, we have a flat earther. On the other side, the world's most famous scientists. These two men are in court to settle a bet. One says the earth is flat and the other says the earth is round. Only one can win and the whole of England is watching. Spoiler alert, the flat earther wins. Here is that incredible story. If this was a movie, our scene would open at the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand in London. The year is 1876. It's January the 17th. In the blue corner, Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace. He is the most famous scientist in the world. But throughout his life, he's had money problems. He's always short of money. But he's a genius. He has a brilliant mind. He's a geek. He's a scientist. He's a nerd. Why is Alfred Russel Wallace famous? Well, he discovered what is probably the most important and robust discovery ever. Evolution. Oh, you think Charles Darwin discovered evolution? Not a bit of it. I live in Hertford. Wallace lived in Hertford. Wallace beat Darwin by years. Argue about it in the comments all you like, but for me, Wallace is the father of evolution. He lived in Hertford, he wins. Darwin and Wallace are both gentlemen of science. They're friends and they're colleagues. They support and defend each other. In 1876, evolution is brand new and it's still known as the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution. The church, though, is up in arms about it. Now, Wallace is an honourable man. He's the hero of our story, and he will defend Darwin and he'll defend evolution until his dying day. It's the 17th of January 1876 and Wallace is in court awaiting the verdict. He doesn't like the limelight. He sits uncomfortably in Court 1 of the Queen's Bench Division, but all eyes are on him. Everyone is packed into the court, straining to get a look at the great man of science. The press are here. The public gallery is stuffed to the gills. This is a big case. It has caught the public imagination. In the red corner, John Hampden. Facing down Wallace in court, awaiting the verdict, is John Hampden. It's Monday. It's 5 o'clock. It's cold. In a few days there'll be heavy snow, but John Hampden isn't shivering. No, he's confident, he's arrogant, he's smug. He's 56 years old, he's the same age as me, and basically he's a nobody. This is his chance to make his name. Hampden is the son of a preacher and he's a Bible literalist, bent on defending Genesis to the hilt. He's loud and persistent and he's a relentless self-promoter. While Wallace struggles with money, Hampden has deep, deep pockets. While Wallace is from a modest background, Hampden is confident. He comes from money. He's sure of himself. Cocksure. Hampden is comfortable preaching to the crowds. He's an enigmatic speaker and he's a creationist. He's a zealot. He once said, "No one can believe a single doctrine or dogma of modern astronomy and accept scriptures as divine revelation." In other words, he thinks science is baloney. The Bible is all you need. He is on a crusade. Hampden believes the earth is flat. He's not the first flat earther. We'll meet him in a minute. And he's certainly not the last. Wallace will defend Darwin till he dies. Hampden will defend a man called Rowbottom just as vigorously. Rowbottom is the father of flat earth. It's his idea. So how do they prove the earth is flat? The Bedford Level Experiment. It was dreamt up by Samuel Burley Rowbottom, who went by the stage name Parallax. Now this guy is interesting and he deserves a whole video to himself, but basically Parallax is the original flat earther. He's the guy who came up with the whole idea. Parallax is a quack. He sells miracle cures, he's a mad inventor, he's got patents. He was at one stage a sort of cult leader. If the 19th century equivalent of YouTube was the lecture circuit, then Parallax's Flat Earth lecture was a viral hit. In his lectures, he claimed the sun would soon go out. There would be a universal light. Everyone would be a brilliant walking luminary. There would be no oxygen. Men would not need food. There would be no disease, and you would live forever. Real fire and brimstone stuff, and the crowds loved it. He also, in his lectures, says that the world is circular and flat, surrounded by an infinite boundary of ice with the North Pole at its centre. The land floats on the ocean sits on the vapour, and the vapour is on top of infinite fire. Serious scientists, of course, laughed at him. He was selling snake oil. He knew it, but he was making money. The flat earth thing has legs. He's enigmatic, a great speaker. He can answer any question. He's convincing. Basically, he's a religious fundamentalist. He thinks religion is endangered by science. Only the Bible is true. Flat Earth is his challenge to science. And he has an experiment that proves it. In 1849, he publishes the first flat earth pamphlet, 16 pages describing the Bedford level experiment, in which he proves the earth is flat. Hampden is standing in court, and he is Parallax's biggest fan. He's latched on to the flat earth idea, and he's promoting it. It's working for him too. People like it. He's making waves. He's getting known. The flat earth rocket is on the launch pad. People are taking notice, but there's a big difference between YouTube and the lecture circuit. YouTube can be seen by millions of people, but a popular lecture might only be seen by hundreds. He needs to scale things up. For the flat earth rocket to take off, it needs wider public exposure. If the Bedford level experiment is the rocket fuel, then Hampden is in court with Alfred Russel Wallace, hoping to start the engines. Sitting in court, Hampden is very deliberately taking on Wallace. He's challenging one of the greatest minds of all time. For him, this is a religious crusade. For the press and the public, of course, it's a circus. Hampden is charismatic. He's the underdog. Wallace is the dull establishment figure. Hampden has done the Bedford level experiment. He's done it over and over again. He always gets the same result, and guess what? The earth is flat. He's seen the light. He's convinced science is lying. The earth is flat. Science is baloney. Hampden is saying he's uncovered a huge conspiracy. So here's why we are in court. John Hampden was so sure of himself a few years ago in 1870, he offered a whopping £500 to anyone who could prove him and the Bedford level experiment wrong. He put an advert in the paper, a brilliant move. Hampden figured no one would accept his challenge. No scientist would want the big lie to be exposed. But Wallace took the bet. Wallace, remember, wasn't rich. He wasn't good with money. He saw the bet, and he saw an easy way to make bank. So what is this experiment, and how does it work? Well, look, here's the basic idea. Imagine you're standing on a beach. There's a boat going straight out to sea. There's a flag on its mast, and you watch the boat as it travels away from you. If the world is flat, the flag stays at the same height, right? If the world is round, the flag should slowly get lower and lower and lower as it follows the curve of the earth until it's completely hidden under the horizon. The circumference of the earth is 24,901 miles. When the boat is 10 miles away, it should drop by 24 foot. The parallax experiment is simple. The old Bedford Canal is long and straight. No locks, just 10 miles of flat canal. It's the perfect place to watch a boat drifting off towards the horizon. Parallax stuck a wooden pole in the middle of the canal, exactly 8 inches above the water. He then walked 4 miles down the towpath and put another pole exactly 8 inches above the water. A third pole was plonked bang in the middle, 8 inches above the water. Through his telescope, he could see all 3 poles perfectly lined up. It's simple and compelling. Hampden did it, and the 3 poles all lined up. The Earth is therefore flat. Wallace and Hampden are in court to settle the bet. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's the winner? Who's the loser? Is the Earth flat or is it round? Wallace took the bet to make money, but also to educate people and to put an end to this silly flat earth nonsense that everyone was talking about. Wallace had trained as a surveyor. It wasn't even a difficult problem for him. Queen Victoria, remember, is sitting on the throne, and not as a queen but as an empress. The sun never sets on the British Empire. The British were building railways and canals across a third of the globe. Queen Victoria's surveyors had been correcting their sights for the curvature of the earth for a very long time. So this was easy money. The Bedford level experiment is simple, isn't it? It shows the world is flat. It's common sense, but the world isn't flat. So it has to be flawed. But how? And here's the thing, and it gets me every time. The reason it's a bad experiment just isn't something you're going to like. It's complex.
Here comes the science bit.
The experiment is flawed. Of course it's flawed. They didn't take into account refraction. Air bends light. You can see things even though they're over the horizon. I was with the kids once at the beach and we saw a boat way off in the distance. It was floating above the water. It was an optical illusion, a mirage. When we looked carefully, the boat had no lower hull and it had no keel. It's the same when you see puddles on hot summer roads or you see an oasis in the desert. It happens when cooler air is sitting on a layer of warmer air. When sunlight coming down from the sky approaches the air near the warmer surface, it's bent back upwards to your eyes, making the sky appear to be reflected on the road or making a boat appear to be floating above the waves. Your brain thinks light is going in a straight line, but light bends. Look, if you don't get it, stick your fingers in a glass of water and you'll soon see what I mean. When Parallax and Hampden did the experiment, they loaded the dice. They had the telescope only 8 inches above the water. It guaranteed refraction. Wallace spotted the error. He did what any good surveyor would do. He modified the experiment. Instead of measuring how far the flag goes down over the horizon, he measured how far it goes up. Wallace took a look at the canal and realised there were 2 bridges, 6 miles apart. The first bridge was 13 foot 3 inches above the water. So on the other bridge, he painted a big black band 13 foot 3 inches above the water. Bang in the middle of the 2 bridges, he stuck a pole in the canal with a big red dot 13 foot 3 inches above the water. All he had to do was look through his telescope. If the world is flat, he would see the red dot perfectly lined up over the black band on the far bridge. If the world is curved, then the red dot would be above the black band. Do the maths. Over a distance of 6 miles, the red dot should be 5 foot 8 inches above the black band, taking into account refraction, around 5 foot above it. If you're going to have a bet for that much money, you need a written agreement and an umpire. Wallace suggested a few, but Hampden refused to let a scientist be the referee, but he did agree on John Henry Walsh, who was the editor of The Field. Now, The Field was a newspaper that covered sport and horse racing. Walsh wasn't a man of science, but he knew how to settle a bet. Both men gave him £500 and agreed his decision was final. Wallace did his refined experiment. The sporting editor took a look. Wallace was right, red dot 5 foot above black band. Hampden was wrong, the earth is curved. Hampden wouldn't accept the result. Loads of excuses. The telescope isn't level, the telescope is faulty, there's no crosshair, it's out of focus. So they did it again and again. New telescope, spirit level, an optician. Hampden wouldn't even look through the telescope. Walsh, the sporting editor, took a look. Wallace was right. Hampden was wrong. The earth is curved. Wallace collected his £1,000, Walsh wrote up the story for publication, and they thought that was the end of it. But Hampden was furious. He demanded his money back. Wallace offered to sit him down and explain it all to him. He offered to do more experiments, but Hampden was having none of it. He thought it was a fix. He'd been stitched up by the deep state. They were all in on it. He called them blockheads and liars. He called them unscrupulous. He published pamphlets calling Wallace a swindler and a cheat, a knave, a thief, an imposter, a rogue, a felon. He trolled Wallace relentlessly. At first, Wallace ignored him, but Hampden wouldn't stop, claiming his silence was an admission of guilt. He wrote to the newspapers. He bombarded Wallace's friends and colleagues with letters and postcards. It was an 18th century Twitter spat. Finally, he wrote a really, really nasty letter to Wallace's wife. He said he would smash Wallace's head to a pulp, and he called her a miserable wretch, obliged to live with a convicted felon. He had gone too far. It was the final straw. Wallace had to act. Wallace sued Hampden. Hampden sued Wallace. 6 cases, 6 trials. Wallace sued Hampden for defamation. Hampden said Wallace had cheated and lied. He wanted his money back, and he wanted publicity. Remember the media storm over the Johnny Depp libel cases? Imagine that and then some. The newspapers couldn't get enough of it. It was a media sensation. The respected, quiet, modest genius versus the nobody, loudmouth crackpot. It was David versus Goliath, the common man versus the giant man of science. It was Bible-bashing creationist versus the elite science establishment. The press and the public loved it. They lapped up every salacious detail. We're back in court. The Royal Courts of Justice, the Strand, London. In court, Wallace was quiet, modest, and bookish. He was a nerdy science geek. Even Darwin said he was boring. His autobiography, please don't read it. It will send you to sleep. John Hampden, though, was cheeky. In some of the trials, he represented himself. No lawyer for him. He was enigmatic, charismatic. He got the jury and the judge laughing. Trust me, I've read the court transcripts. This guy was funny. The case is finished. It's 5 o'clock. The court is ordered to be silent. Lord Chief Justice Cockburn walks in. This is the highest court in the land. This is the top judge. He has a brilliant legal mind and a brain the size of a planet. He's tough but fair. He's heard the biggest cases of the 19th century. He's fluent in French, German, Italian and Spanish. He has political ambitions. He was the Solicitor General and the Attorney General. He has a short temper, a keen mind and a sharp wit. The public whispers about his many mistresses. He's in his red robes, swathes of ermine at his collars and sleeves, the huge gold chain of office is around his neck, and on his head a long white wig. He sits and clears his throat. He is damning in his condemnation of Hampden. The object of the plaintiff in offering the challenge he gave was not to ascertain a scientific fact, but to establish his own view in a marked and triumphant manner. To use a common phrase, his object was to back his own opinion. The parties themselves spoke of it as a wager. I have no hesitation in holding it to be such. Consequently, that the case is concluded. Our judgment will therefore be for the plaintiff. Wallace has lost. Wallace has lost. Wallace has lost. Hampden has won. Wallace has lost, Hampden has won, David beat Goliath.
The Public Order Act was legal, and actually we're now going to hear from someone on behalf of who are obviously delighted with this result.
Wallace has lost, Hampden has won, David beat Goliath. Now forget that the court was actually asked to decide if the wager was legal. English law back then didn't protect gambling. Gambling was basically illegal. Forget what the court actually decided. Forget they were debating whether a betting slip is an enforceable contract. The press and the public understood the verdict. It meant one thing and one thing only. Wallace had not proved the earth was round. And if the earth's not round, then it's flat. The flat earth rocket was launched. Hampden was thrilled. He got his money back. He got tons of free publicity. People went bananas. It was the latest thing. Up and down the country, people were throwing themselves in canals, thrashing around in rivers, repeating the experiment, hammering poles into the mud. Pamphlets were published, clubs were started, societies were founded. Flat earth was on the map. Flat earth was now a thing. The flat earth rocket had taken off. Hampden's mate, a guy called Bill Carpenter, exported the craze to the USA, and flat Earth was in orbit, and it still is, ironically circling its way around the world. Wallace had lost the case. Wallace was outsmarted by a huckster. He was wrong-footed by a more canny operator. So, what happened to Wallace? Well, he spent the next 15 years fighting in the courts. It cost him hundreds of pounds in court fees and lawyers' fees. Technically, it was Walsh, the editor of the Field, who had to pay Hampden the £500 back, but Wallace was an honourable man and he footed the bill. Eventually, Wallace won all the libel cases, but Hampden never paid him a penny. He gave everything he owned to his son-in-law and declared himself a bankrupt. He lost all 3 libel cases and paid nothing. He went to prison 3 times, but it was only for a matter of a few weeks. For Wallace, it was too little and too late. The damage had been done. The news cycle had moved on. Wallace carried on working and writing. Genius doesn't stop. But his reputation was in tatters. The whole thing had been an embarrassing farce. He was the fool who'd taken a daft bet. He'd been dragged through the courts and the press had had a field day with him. Now, he just looked like an idiot. I'm not sure what's worse, that he inadvertently legitimised the flat earth movement, or that his rightful place in history fizzled, faded, and all but vanished. Here, let me show you something. This is the house he lived in. 5 minutes from my house in Hertford. It's now a doctor's surgery. One of the greatest minds of science lived right there. No statues, not even in his hometown. The only reminder, that small plaque. He didn't want fame, but he had certainly earned it. In the court of public opinion, Wallace lost. Flat Earth was now a thing. Everyone thought the court had decided the Earth was flat. So how do I sum this up? Sure, I could talk about fake news and conspiracy theories. I could moan about how the media always managed to misinterpret court cases. It wouldn't be hard to just lay into money-making schemes that are based on hot air. And maybe I should pontificate on how science is difficult. But I think you, me, and Alfred, Russel, Wallace deserve better than that. I think this whole flat earth thing is a positive. Just because they're wrong doesn't mean they're doing any wrong. Look at it this way. You and me and millions of people have listened to the flat earth arguments. Yes, you have. You looked. You've seen the videos. I did. I really enjoyed them. They made me think. Most people realise it's nonsense, but it prompts lots of us, including me, to say, hang on, how do we know the Earth is round? Maybe I was taught this in school, but I can't remember a specific class on whether the Earth is flat or not. I needed a refresher course, so I read up on it. Lots of people do. It's great. I learned about time zones, the Coriolis effect, geometry and triangles on spheres. I genned up on tall buildings and horizons and double sunsets. I discovered lunar eclipses, star constellations north and south of the equator, gravity and history, and Galileo and the moons of Jupiter, and how the Greeks figured it all out thousands of years ago with just sticks and shadows. And if you look it all up, just like me, you will end up staring in awe at photos taken from space of our tiny, fragile blue-green ball suspended in nothingness, spinning in the blackness of eternity. We all come away a little bit wiser. Wallace may have lost the bet. He may have lost at court, but for me, Wallace is the winner, an unassuming English gentleman. In losing that bet, he educated millions. He was modest, yet unconventional. He didn't care about his own reputation at all. He is forgotten, and yet he made one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. When John Hampden died, the Dundee Evening Telegraph described him as one of our leading cranks. When Alfred Russel Wallace died at the age of 90, the New York Times called him the last of the giants. I'm Matthew Fresco. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you stayed this far, you may as well subscribe. Oh! Scared the shit out of me.